title that I gave Peter quite a while ago of Jung and Schwartz, UFOs in the Hall of the Paranormal. I think on the website they called it the pole of the paranormal. And you know, it's interesting, it's a misspelled word. People are always trying to edit my freaky thoughts, I guess. But the pole of the paranormal, but I really wanted to say the pall, like something that has a little bit of a distaste to it. You know, I think a lot of people in Western science want to just have a physical UFO they can kick and measure and metrics around it, and it fits into physics, and we're going to go with this thing. And unfortunately, the phenomenon doesn't really obey our commands, and it has a lot of other twists and turns. So I wanted to take a look at what Jung and Schwartz had to say about it, but it's really just a springboard for these types of discussions. It's not a doctrinaire thing. I mean, somebody here might be a much better student of me just reading the books and contemplating what people have thought that they were trying to say, because it wasn't clear in all cases. But our first character here is Carl Gustav Jung, 1875 and 1961, so he's almost a modern character. He was really the last surviving direct Freud, protege, I suppose is a word. He directly studied under Freud, and you can see that in his work. His books have that kind of tone. But as far as him and UFOs goes, it all started July '54 in Zurich, where he lives. He studied in Zurich and in Paris. But Zurich Weekly publishes some letters that he wrote. Basically, a columnist asked for his opinion about these crazy UFOs, what do you think? And he wrote a couple letters in response to that. So that's how it all began. Well, that was in July '54. By the summer of '55, FSR in the UK, which is Flying Saucer Review, picks up on it, and they do kind of like a shortened version, which of course is more to the point, and it's definitely less ambiguous, and it's just kind of more cut and paste with the scissors, and just kind of made it a lot less equivocal than his original statement. And by the summer of '58, I guess travel, news traveled a lot slower back then, but the summer of '58, APRO, which is was a big U.S. Organization at the time, in the U.S., the APRO Bulletin put out a regurgitation of what he had said. This is picked up by the Associated Press, the New York Times, and basically it's a total furor at that point as far as Jung is concerned. I can't quite say it right, but anyway. Then it gets to Newsweek, and they quote an Air Force man who says, "I always knew those head shrinkers were crackpots. Now we know." So this is the kind of label that gets put on him. And he's not at all happy about this kind of negative publicity, because what he'd written, it was very nuanced and equivocal and psychological, and what came out was just a real basic storyline. Sky objects are real, UFOs are real. That's all that people really picked up on all these stories that went around the world. This is one of the stories here, and this is Los Angeles Times after everybody started picking up on it. And we can read a little bit here. "I can only say for certain these things are not a mere rumor. Something has been seen," Jung said it in a report. I noticed in this book that word rumor is used a lot, which I think is probably a bad translation from the German, because they use myth, but then they also throw in this word rumor. And I don't think rumors really probably is the right word, but it's probably the closest translation it could get. But Jung started his research on UFOs in 1944, and so forth and so on. I've gathered a massive observations of unidentified flying objects since 1954, and my studies made by the American and Canadian Air Forces indicate that observations to be real. And he goes on along that vein, that the construction of these machines proves a scientific technique immensely superior to ours cannot be argued. The Air Force has an investigation of flying saucers ongoing. They've been reported over the past 10 years. And Dr. Jung is one of the remaining former students of Sigmund Freud. He lives in Zurich, and he's very prestigious, and now he's coming out with this story. And he says, naturally, if this were true, that these are extraterrestrials, it will basically consign our science to the dust heap. And he goes from there. And that is kind of a portion of what he had to say, but of course, like I said, more nuanced and layered and all this kind of stuff. So Jung doesn't like his reputation as it's flying around the globe that he's this crackpot psychiatrist that's just gone off the deep end. or psychologist in this case. When you read his books, though, I thought it was strange. I thought that Jung was kind of made a quick study in the local press and sort of ventured an opinion about the subject. But when you read his book, he's extremely well read. He was a member of APRO. He was later a member of NICAP, and he read every book that came out. I mean, now you really can't claim to read every book that comes out, or that's what you do, about 80 hours a week, because you can't read every book that comes out. But he was extremely well read, and I was surprised by that, actually, reading it. But he's familiar with all the literature, Edward Ruppelt's books. He's read every book from Major Donald Kehoe, and he just definitely keeps up with it. He writes personal letters to the APRO heads. Well, to counter all this what he considers to be negative publicity, he does do an article with UPI, United Press International, and tries to set the record straight, but then he realizes he's got to do a book. So he counters by cooperating with UPI, and his statement was very agnostic and measured and equivocal and psychological, and he follows it up with this book. In 1958, it comes out in Zurich. 1959, it hits the US scene. And you're probably saying, what does it say? What's it about? Well, some of the quotes in the book, I think, are really interesting, and it's easy to misquote them if you don't just read the quotes. Let me just read a little bit of the book. I feel compelled to sound a note of warning, but my voice is much too weak to reach the ear of the multitude. It's not presumption that drives me, but my conscience as a psychiatrist that bids me fulfill my duty and prepare those few who will hear me for coming events which are in accord with the end of an era. Very foreboding. He cites Egyptian history, kind of rambles there for a while in the book, talks about classical Plato, Platonic ideas. Then he says, quote, the spring point is entering Aquarius, long-lasting transformations of the collective psyche. I must take this risk to my reputation. I do not do this with a light heart. I undertake this thankless task in the expectation that my chisel will make no impression on the hard stone it meets. I found that to be a great quote. I undertake this thankless task with the expectation that my chisel will make no impression on the hard stone it meets. So he's getting through to people, but he feels he's honor-bound, duty-bound to express himself. And some of his thoughts in the book, and like I said, it's very contradictory, it's very equivocal. He basically is only interested in the psyche and the psychological impact of what the UFO subject may mean. And that's what I'm getting out of it. He does postulate in the book, what if these are truly people from other worlds? What if they have superior technology? What will it do to us? We will be oppressed like somebody raises under the hand of the white man. We will suffer the same fate. We will have that happening to us. That's what he goes on. He's much more, it seems to me, if his neighbor said, you won't believe this, but this little alien entity of this UFO came down, the entity came in my house, the entity was telling me something telepathically, I'm really afraid to go out during the day, I don't know if I'm going to work again, I'm blown away by this experience. He would not be concerned that the alien was going to come in his house. He would be more concerned with, well, how did that make you feel? Well, how does that work with your ego and your id? How is that working with your system of this and that? How did that affect you? Because that would be his interest. So his two ideas that he comes up with many ideas that he just sort of tosses around the book. It never seems to really come down on any one idea. But one postulate is there's a strange object in the sky, and that provokes the conscious and the unconscious visions, conjectures, and fantasy and mythology. So we do have a conscious mind seeing the object, but then the unconscious mind runs away with it. Like, who cares what that object was? It's so fascinating, the unconscious mind is really running away with it and thinking it's ET or thinking it's this or that. Or an unusual intense emotion from within then creates the vision. The unconscious, because it's embroiled in all this controversy and turmoil, and it's the end of an age, and it's difficult with the Russians are up to something, the Soviets back in the day of this book, and all this turmoil, it's a difficult time for man, so all this turmoil inside projects this thing outward, and that's what causes it to be seen. And we're prepared for this because there was the rumor of the ghost rockets over Sweden and other parts of Europe. There's Foo Fighters hanging around the World War II period. War of the Worlds is a fascinating thing on the radio, this play that really screws with people's heads and they think it's really happening. So obviously, it's so obvious to leap to the conclusion that ET is invading. That's just